Hey, yo, what's good, everyone? Twisted here with the Oprah Sorcery, and today I'm going to be having a conversation with my lovely co-host Devi here, and it's going to be about the subject of timelines, reality shifting, and time travel. This goes ahead and follows a conversation, or at least a monologue that I was having a while back. I believe it was the 37th, sort of video, and I guess the number progression, what have you. But it was about time, the general concept and understanding of it, going ahead and addressing that a little bit, and also, speaking about some personifications or entities that are related to time, amongst other things. You can check that out more so in detail, but to get more so a grasp on it. But in terms of this subject in of itself, I figured that getting Debbie's perspective on this, for something a little more so all encompassing as opposed to just that general basic sort of thing, would probably be very helpful. So I guess to start off, you got any particular initial thoughts on this, Debbie?
On timelines in and of themselves, um,
Yes.
well, I mean, you know what I do in terms of work. You know how I work. We've we've worked together for a while,
Yes.
but in terms of timelines and everything like that, like I will share how I see them. Um, so whenever I am doing readings for clients, whenever I am, even just for friends, because I do that all the time. How many times do we have people pop in and I'm just like, okay, let's go, like we're on a roll. Um,
Yes.
but whenever I'm looking into it, it's almost like it's either like down a dirt road or like a highway. And I'm literally seeing like this highway system like unfold in front of me. And every turn off, every major fork in the road, everything like that is different decisions that are made, and they're right there. And technically, they're parallel to each other at all times, whether you make the choice to go left or right, dependent on which choice you're making. Like, it could be literally just having eggs for breakfast or cereal for breakfast, right?
Yes.
Um, and for that, I see this unfold in front of me, especially as, people are um having difficulties. Like a lot of times it'll be relationship issues that I'm helping people uncover and take care of, right? And either they go with the person or they don't. A lot of times how I'll see it is like we're at that fork in the road and one of them is a lot wider than the other. So it's a lot easier of a path and it's more likely the path that they're going to choose. Now, that doesn't mean that the other path doesn't exist. It just means that they're less likely to choose that in this particular time frame. Um, but it is still an option. So that's really how I see timelines and everything like that. It's just dependent on the choices that you're making at that moment.
Oh, yes. Yes. And speaking about like those choices, right? Like, so different choices had different outcomes, right? You're at some sort of, fork in the road, you could say, and left or right, as you had stated, and there will be different outcomes, different things that occur. And one thing that happens to come to mind of like how said things can be identified is, what we at least, used to more so refer to as the butterfly effect, right? In terms of, the popular film that came out in like the mid to early 2000s, or just the general concept in of itself, where like, you go ahead and, I'm not going ahead and probably remembering this all too exactly well, but you go ahead and you know, kill a butterfly or something of that nature, and then some sort of large natural disaster occurs in
Oh no.
a continent,
No, it would be
as
a
an effect
butterfly's
of that.
flapping its wings and then a hurricane happens across the world because of the ripples and everything like that.
Oh yes, yes, but the sort of just causal nature of that, right? Like everything being interconnected, interwoven, and that going along the lines of like timelines in of themselves.
Hmm.
and the little changes that you make cause said ripples that you're referring to. And like, okay, so if you choose, I don't know, let's go ahead and something that people love to go ahead and talk about when it comes to the magic and spirituality and all that is good old romance and all that, especially considering we had that recent conversation about love spells, right?
Yes.
So if you go ahead and you happen to choose, I don't know, Stacy as opposed to say Brittany or whatever sort of basic bitch name you want to go ahead and choose, um, you know, you choose one or the other, and then that's going to go ahead and affect a particular timeline, the course of action. Maybe
Hmm.
say with Stacy, you go ahead and you're more likely to have a person who is like, going to be more so your ideal partner, you know, and all that, and that changes how your life goes ahead and goes about. You might have yourself a nice good old white picket fence with however many kids and all of that, or say you go with Brittany or whomever, and they aren't necessarily ideal for you, whether you're able to see it or not. And that changes the course of your life over time. And, say, I don't know, maybe they go ahead and break your heart, or, just, they're just like, not the optimal person. Then, the other individual, Stacy, goes and moves on, finds someone else. And, you're just left there like, damn, I just went ahead and made the wrong decision, so on and so forth. And that goes into itself and causes those are choices that cause different timelines to either be created, or you can just say, like, if you want to think of it in line of like a train going along tracks and kind of like having that sort of switch flip of like which track you go on to get to a different destination. That in of itself is kind of like what it comes down to. And I went ahead and referred to the butterfly effect, to talk about the sort of like causal nature of things. But more so nowadays, we usually go ahead and look at these sort of like differences under the name of Mandela effects, which many people attribute to say, CERN and the Large Hadron Collider, the LHC going and performing experiments, or you could say different sorts of global sort of or events, or say astrological events, or different portals opening up due to different cosmological energies, what have you. There's a lot of different ways to approach this sort of thing. Yet more so we kind of refer to them as Mandela effects. So name a few the different ways in which Darth Vader says, "Luke, I am your father," or "No, I am your father," or the color of Pikachu's tail, or the Berenstein Bears sort of thing and how it's pronounced and or spelled.
Oh no, I'm
Those
going
are
to
just
pull up one. I'm going to pull up one because you and I
yes.
actually remember this one completely differently. King
Oh
Tut's
yeah.
mask. King
Oh
Tut's
yes.
death
Yes.
mask,
Oh yeah.
because I am a huge archaeology buff, right? I know what
Yes.
this mask looked like. That mask never had anything on the forehead. I swear to the gods above, that mask never had anything on the forehead. And now it's got like this vulture thing and this snake thing. And I'm just sitting there going, what the hell is that?
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and say it's not as if I remember it differently. It just more so as I'm not as adamant about it. I'm just more so like giving a Kanye shrug and like, okay, like, but I very much do remember there just being a cobra snake on top as opposed to a vulture, winged sort of creature face on it as well, and it being both there. I remember just one distinct thing, that being a cobra, which is usually associated with the sign of Egyptian royalty and so on and so forth. And not just that, but throughout different world religions, like, that being a sign of divinity. And these sort of like, oh yes, you are divine in nature, and you go ahead and have access, say, to Kundalini energy, that ascending serpents, and that is shown in the caduceus symbol, so on and so forth. But yes, I do remember that particular, like, one animal on there as opposed to two of them. But that, there you go. That's another example of, you know, different approaches to these sorts of things. And now, granted, while say Devi and I may have like, different levels of certainty or different interpretations of that. Imagine all these different other things when you look at Mandela effects or different changes as examples of potential timeline splits of people saying, "Oh, I came from this timeline," or "I came from that timeline," or "Things used to be like this. Why is it like this now?" And all this sort of confusion. And that is something that quite a few people have been noticing as of late, from my understanding, for around at least say the past decade or so.
Hmm.
And to actually bring up the namesake of the Mandela effects as well, the notion that quite a few people believe or remember that Nelson Mandela died in prison, as opposed to saying, he died, I believe it was sometime last decade in 2010s, um, and all that. Me personally, I do not remember him dying in prison. I very much remember him having been freed, and that he happened to die in 2010s. Nothing like amiss for myself about that. But to each their own, and to each to discover and figure it out. But that is kind of like an example of a signifier of potentially having differential experiences in different timelines.
Hmm.
There now, granted, some people may be mistaken about that for themselves or what have you. Um, but it also could be legitimate. So
I mean, with
you
that,
know,
I mean, we could let me just say, I remember him dying in prison. I I genuinely do. Um, so again, it's almost like instead of like different timelines going out, we've had this mashing of them where they're all just kind of compounding, or some of them are compounding now. And so we're sitting here going, this is not what I remember. What the hell just happened?
oh yes. Well, if we're going to talk about compounding, then I'm going to go ahead and talk about. This is from the middle of the 2010s, and this is going to go ahead and be like one of a couple examples of like Marvel sort of like Marvel comics sort of like base examples for the idea of timelines and the whole multiverse sort of thing, and all these different sort of like branching off realities and such based on decisions being made and running concurrently with each other. So there was this one crossover event with in Marvel Comics from about 2015 to 2016. It started beforehand, in terms of like the original seeds being interwoven into the comics themselves, but it came more so to the culmination at that point in time, to which they called it Secret Wars. And in that sort of thing right there, um, they had these so in the actual comics, a lot of the popular characters who are considered as like the leaders or the intelligent folk, say for example Captain America, Mr. Fantastic, Professor X, Black Panther, all these different individuals, they were noticing that there were what they called incursions happening, right? So this was kind of like showcased as like, all right, they're seeing a ripple in the sky, and then they see what appears to be another Earth crashing in, like hurtling towards them, right? And from that understanding, like they had already, by this time in the comics, had different sorts of instances of like, different universes, multiverses, timelines, all of that. They kind of did it more so like on an individualistic sort of scale, especially in the X Men comics. But when they went ahead and had these incursion events happening, it's like, oh shit, it looks like it's about to crash into us, and these different universes are crashing into one another, and all of that. And like in having that occur, like the Illuminati as they call themselves, so the previous and several more characters that I mentioned, like how the fuck do we stop this? How do we save our own universe and our own timeline and all of that? And they went ahead and they tried to use the Infinity Gauntlet and the Infinity Stones, and I don't remember exactly whether it occurred to work or not, in that particular instance, because it's been a moment since they read the event. But in any case, they lost those in the process, and pretty much, leading up to the actual event in of itself of Secret Wars, it's like, all right, they're going ahead and they're pretty much hitting the end of existence as they knew it and all of that, and the sort of like mashing it together, and you mentioning kind of like timelines and all that mashing it together kind of reminds me of that quite a bit.
Hmm.
um and this isn't necessarily the first instance of like, the Marvel universe going ahead and having different multiversal sorts of things, with the recent films that have come out. But I'll just go ahead and speak a little bit more so about Secret Wars before I go on and use those as examples as well. So, with the actual crossover events, when it actually plays out fully, you know, um, there is what they deemed as the Beyonders, right? Who kind of like created the time, created the universes, the multiverse, these different timelines, all these like sort of things, like existence as they, the Marvel characters understood it, and they pretty much, it was inferred that they pretty much got fucking bored with everything. They got bored with it. It's like, all right, we're gonna go ahead and just implode this crap and forget the experiment. We can go ahead and create something else. Like, they're pretty much like, gods that are, running this simulation, you could say. And, uh, pretty much when it comes to how it's somehow resolved or some sort of salvation for the Marvel comics to continue. Doctor Doom and Doctor Strange figure out a way to attain some power of the Beyonders, and you could say defeat them, or at least a chunk of them, and they're able to stitch together these realities, and after they all collide and implode on one another and all that sort of thing, into what he calls battle world, what they call battle world. And Dr. Doom pretty much goes ahead and wins and takes over battle world and what remains of existence, at least in the Marvel like frame of things, and becomes God Emperor Doom. And like, then as events play out, eventually they get to a point where the universe, the multiverse, is kind of like recreated again, and they're able, like, they go ahead and they start rebuilding it from that initial point onward. So it's kind of like the idea of like our universe, had like the Big Bang and it started out, and eventually it'll have a death, right? As modern science goes ahead and puts it. But then there will be a sort of like, rebirth event, a restart, a reoccurring of the cycle. And this includes timelines and of themselves and multiverses and, this, that, and the third. So that was quite a bit of elaboration on that. But to name the other sorts of examples where different multiverses, timelines, all that are gone ahead and explored. There's Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness film, which I know I've been on your ass, Debbie, while watching the original Doctor Strange, and then
I
eventually Doctor
know.
Strange in the
I
Multiverse of
know.
Madness.
We'll have to do it as a server. That's the only way to get
Yes,
me to do
yes.
something like that.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. But yeah, I think that you would enjoy it quite a bit. Obviously the magical theme of it, but also like special effects wise, and I think it
Hmm.
definitely illustrates, like how perception can change when in altered states and so on and so forth,
Hmm.
right? Excuse me. But also there is the TV show Loki, right?
Hmm.
And what is considered like so Loki, in terms of like having a different alternate timeline in the main continuity, Loki's dead, right? He died in the Avengers like films. I believe it was I'm trying to think. It was Infinity something, but then Endgame was the next one. But yes, in any case, right? He died in the main continuity. And in Endgame, they're trying to find the Infinity Stones and all of that, once again from different points in time in order to go ahead and, reverse what Thanos did. in the snap, right? The very infamous snap now from not happening in the film and wiping out half of the whole universe in that MCU, you know, and Marvel Cinematic Universe. So the alternate Loki, right? In previous, the previous sorts of a series of events. He, after the whole first Avengers film, he, was like, "Oh, I'm going back to Asgard. I'm all locked up and all that." But there's a differentiation, thus creating another timeline in of itself. Since we're on that subject, and he goes ahead and escapes that, and after that, he gets pretty much picked up by the TVA, right? And I'm going to go ahead and actually, because I don't remember what it stands for, and just because I'm Mr. Semantics guy, I'm going to go ahead and look up what the TVA stands for, but I'm going to continue talking the subject. So the TVA, in of itself, picks him up. It's like, hey, look, you went ahead and you fucked with timelines by escaping and doing this, that, and third. You created an offshoot. You created an aberration. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna, you're pretty much gonna get locked up, or I believe it was actually gonna be destroyed, right? Because that was a correction that was needed or something like that. But okay, let me just try to find it here because once again, Mr. Semantics guy. But yeah, time variance authority. That's what TVA stands for. Time variance authority. And yeah, pretty much, goes ahead and, in doing so, right, like he becomes more so acquainted with the TVA. And instead of him being destroyed, this one particular character wants him to actually be helpful, right? And go ahead and track down another aspect of himself. So that's just a couple examples from the Marvel, side of things that you can see as, pop culture examples if you're curious about the concept of timelines and all of that. But before I go ahead and list, several more, do you happen to think of anything for yourself that happen to serve as like good examples for those who want to understand like timelines and shifting realities and all of that?
Oh gosh, the thing is, there's so much. This is something that's just done a lot in terms of media or anything like that. Um, and I'm horrible with names right off the bat. Like I
Yes,
get
yes,
images and I'm very much a picture person, so I'm sitting here like, oh, I know that one. I don't remember what it's called.
yes, yes, yes.
But no, I don't have any actual names off the top of my head, but I know it's definitely something that's done in tropes all the time. Going back and, correcting something or um, having something done a different way. Of course, there is always the um, like the time police in a sense,
Yes, yeah.
which are just like, no, you are going to keep the order of the universe in the way that it is. You're not going to mess things up. Um, but that's something that's done over and over and over again. So you can find it nearly everywhere in terms of that. Um,
Oh
but
yes.
I really do think, like, in terms of timelines and everything like that, having a time police, would that be necessary? Probably, probably. In order to keep in order to keep the construct stable, people are always like I can see the grids or anything like that, like the
Oh yes,
threads and everything
yes.
like that. In order to keep it stable, you need all of them. If you're sitting there and fucking with something that is, you know, keeping things intact, yeah. Yeah, I could definitely see the need for the time police though.
Oh
So
yes.
I get it.
And oh yes. And like it's not necessarily something I was just like saying, you mentioned time travel in itself, which you know, um that ties into it, like not just like, oh, timelines and like choices you make bridging outward moving forward, but going backward as well, is usually associated with time travel, right? Because the pre I guess modern theory it started off more so in the beginning of 2000s and modern science and started accepting it a little more so until recently, was the idea that you couldn't go forward in time or anything like that. Like, you could, well, actually, no, you can go back in time, right? You can potentially go back in time, right? Like, the idea that, like, you've already tread along this particular path and you can only push forward in that path, right?
Hmm.
You couldn't go back in time, and all sort of thing. The whole idea of like if you did that, then there would be like paradoxes, and there would be like oh, you exist at the same time as a former part of yourself, or say like a former family member. This is a trope that has been gone ahead and
Back to the
spoken about.
Future.
Oh well, yes, yes. Back to the Future, right? And
Yes.
the whole idea in that, I was just about to mention a part of something like that. Not necessarily from Back to the Future initially, but I was gonna mention Back to the Future as an example.
Hmm.
But yes, the whole idea of say Marty McFly going back into the past before he was born, and his mom being attracted to him, and all that sort of thing, and potentially going ahead and make it to where he nor his siblings were born at all because of his interference. But of course, everything works out fine and dandy for him. Um, so of course to the point where there's like it becomes a trilogy and all that, as opposed to just that individual film. But yes, so there's one example of like time travel and like supposing not being able to go backward in time, but hey, look, moving forward you can potentially do so and that sort of notion. But that was before like the idea of like different timelines in like a multiverse coexisting kind of like came more so to the forefront of the public consciousness. And within the modern scientific community or just like people in general, and all of that. And of course with the MCU presenting quite a bit and just many different sorts of media outlets going along with it. Now, and you could say like another sort of film that goes ahead and has this sort of multiversal concept is Everything Everywhere All at Once, that came out this year as well. Which I saw it, and there was quite a bit of hype surrounding it. I'm like, what, this is pretty damn good. I definitely agree with it. That's definitely another one that I recommend for you to go ahead and watch if you haven't yet. And to anyone out there who's listening. But yes, in short, it's about this one Asian woman who goes ahead and has like an alternate version of her husband come into his body, and in the present timeline, and be like, hey, look, we need your help and all that sort of thing. And them jumping timelines using technological means, and eventually to the point where they kind of get so immersed that they do it more so like switching on their own, and the way that's kind of presented is, which I think is a rather good analogy, is in using the device, it's kind of like they were tuning into different frequency bands of like these timelines of themselves, and they happen to go ahead and you know, uh, because of the different frequency band that they're on, they're going to, or they go ahead along a like actual like visually represented tree with branches and different points and such. They're able to go ahead and their experience kind of like shifts in that sort of manner. Um, but also another example we go ahead and utilize, at least for the sake of utilizing technology, right? To go ahead and accomplish these sorts of means, is I believe you may have seen it yourself, and this is more so of an anime than a film, but Steins Gate, um,
Hmm.
and that particular anime right there, which I once again recommend anyone who happens to be listening. But Steins Gate in of itself, um, it draws very much upon the idea, or at least the concept, back in the early 2000s. And this kind of like story right here actually is one of the reasons for more so of like a conspiratorial or like paranormal, or sort of like not seen as serious by the scientific community, but more and more so the internet culture things that kind of like permeated over time, is the story of John Teeter. um, and for those who are unaware, is generally the idea of this character, this figure, this anonymous person named John Teeter happened to come from a different timeline, happened to come from, at least in his timeline, the current time was 2036 or so. And at that point, he had stated that, the world at large, the U.S. had gone through like, a second civil war, or a major, like, large conflict. And at that point, they're more so to a mixture of modern and rural living. More so like, hey, look, we're able to grow, like, have more so an abundance of people growing, their own food, or, having different animals. And I'm paraphrasing, not completely accurate, but there should be ample information on the story of John Teeter out there. Um, but yes, that sort of idea, and they happen to come back not only to the present time at that time, which was like 2001 through 2004, I believe, was like when supposedly John Teeter, or at least someone under the pseudonym of John Teeter, was posting online. But beforehand as well, in the 1970s or 80s at some point, I don't remember exactly what year, and for some reason they needed an IBM computer. I don't remember exactly which model. I will go ahead and find out. Once again, Mr. Specifics and Semantics guy, but utilizing an old IBM computer to go ahead and be able to perform certain actions and all that. Let me just go ahead and find it. All right. So let me go ahead and see. All right. So I'm pulling up the Wikipedia and all that to get a general synopsis. All right, so John Teeter are pseudonyms used on Time Travel Institute and Art Bell's post forums, which are, Art Bell is the host, or at least the former host, he's now deceased, of Coast to Coast AM, a radio show and such, where, I believe it was stated that, I believe there's like, a actual, like, quote unquote call in interview with someone stating that they're John Teeter, right? But in any case, um, so in terms of the pseudonym, like, there are posts made during 2000 2001 by a poster claiming to be an American military time traveler from 2036. Teeter made numerous vague and specific predictions regarding calamitous events in 2004 and beyond, including a nuclear war. Inconsistencies in his explanations, the uniform inaccuracy of his predictions, and a private investigator's findings all led to a general impression that the entire episode was an elaborate hoax. A 2009 investigation concluded that Teeter is likely the creation of Larry Haber, a Florida entertainment lawyer, along with his brother Maury, a computer scientist. Let me try to find a particular part about the good old IBM. All right, here we go. So, in his online postings, Teeter claimed to be an American soldier from 2036 based in Tampa, Florida. He was assigned to a governmental time travel project and sent back to 1975 to retrieve an IBM 5100 computer, which he said was needed to debug various legacy computer programs in 2036, a possible reference to the Unix year 2038 problem. The IBM 5100 runs the APL in basic programming languages and all of that. So pretty much generally speaking, had to get some sort of old IBM computer and all of that. Now, granted, as was stated on the Wikipedia, supposedly the idea is that it was a hoax. You can go ahead and believe it or not. That is up for you to study and decide yourself. I'm just bringing it for the sake of the conversation and all of that. But it is interesting food for thought regardless. And, that being the premise for the Steins Gate anime in of itself. And within the anime, it generally goes ahead and observes, like, all right, you know, um, the main character, whom I forget exactly what his name was, presence, because it's been several years since I watched it. However, he was trying to go ahead and reach what he called Steins Gate, an optimal timeline and such. that he could go ahead and be a part of. Now, granted, I'm paraphrasing, probably misattributing the plot in some regards, but I think it's more better to experience the show in of itself. Yet along the way, in quote unquote accidentally discovering time travel with an old IBM computer and such, he denotes the differences between one timeline and another, and there's actually uh a device that he has that kind of tracks a different sort of numerical code for like what timeline they were on, so on and so forth. It was just more so like kind of like a clock, or as opposed to like say the visual representation in everything everywhere all at once. And one more example I want to go ahead and mention, at least for the present moment, of like, all right, this is another piece of media that you can go ahead and check out that has this sort of general theme in it. Is and this has more so to do with the idea of like a TVA or time cops, that we put it pretty much, is the movie The One starring Jet Li and Jason Statham, and generally in that what we have is the character of Jet Li, right? He has all these different iterations of himself across the multiverse or different timelines, what have you. But one aspect of himself, right, happens to go ahead and be killing off the rest of them, right? And granted, there is a sort of finite number of them, but and I believe it's like 230 or something to that effect for the sake of that film. But in the one aspect of his character that's going around and killing all these other ones, because there is only just him and the, you could say, the bad one left, in which of course the epic showdown throughout the movie and at the end especially, right? And all of that, they both become more so powerful. And because they're taking on the chi, the energy of these other, aspects of themselves that are now deceased, they happen to grow stronger, more so aware, and all of that, and just that general sort of concept and idea. And in and of itself, like I enjoyed that film. I pretty much would say favorable things for all the pieces of media that were mentioned so far as examples. But do you have any particular thoughts after what I could say a long watch list of things that people could go ahead and watch as examples for getting a better understanding of these concepts?
Very long watch list. But no, this is just like, ah, yes, okay, so we're taking down this one, and we're gonna watch this one, and we're gonna watch this one, and it'll be great. Just like have a month of movie marathons. It'll be great.
Oh yes,
No, but I mean, it's my thought process is if it is something that is recurring in the main consciousness of people, and you see this a lot with different types of media. When it's becoming more conscious, that's because there's something there. It is spirits, gods, guides, angels, whatever you want to call them. They will speak to you through different mediums, and the muses will make themselves known and put the ideas out there so that more people can become aware of it. So the fact that there is so much, and it's actually good quality kind of shit, right? Versus like
yes,
this D-rated films, which, not saying all D-rated films are awful. They can be awesome for a good laugh. But
yes.
the fact that it is so ingrained into the consciousness of people now, there's something there. It's more than just, oh, this is an interesting thing. Let's to talk more about it. It's just like, no, if it was just interesting, sure. But the fact that it is capturing so much attention, we got to watch out for it.
Oh yes, yes. And being that you're going ahead and talking about something that is, to go from just the sort of like pop culture sort of references that I was making in media and all that, right? Like, I'm going to go ahead and mention one more. It's more so of an aspect of one. So to draw more so on the idea of like a TVA from Loki or Time Cops, Time Police, right? Taking that to more so of like a metaphysical sort of sense, right? That's in the initial video I made about time, right? I mentioned Saturn, Cronus, and all of that. Different entities that one could work with or just have an understanding of time with, right? And that sort of archetype. But one particular phrasing, one particular wording, and all that that you could say happens to work is that of Time Lord, right? And someone that you and I happen to go ahead and watch their videos is who actually introduced me to that sort of concept, like being interrelated, or at least how they defined it. Going ahead and being interrelated with like governing over different timelines and you know the omniverse, multiverse, so on and so forth. Brother Yosef, to go ahead and give him his credit. Yes, he went ahead and had a video where he talked about Time Lords, and not necessarily the type from Doctor Who, which I know for a fact you're more so familiar with than I, and all of that.
Barely.
Um,
Like don't give me that much credit. Like I will say I don't watch much in the way of TV. Like I don't.
well, considering you have some familiarity with Doctor Who as opposed to me not really having any at all, I would say you're more so acquainted with it than I. But um, yes, the idea of the Time Lords, as Brother Yosef when I presented and described, so I'm going to go ahead and paraphrase what he said in the video, but it's pretty much a demigod who rules over a timeline within the omniverse universe. So in that sort of sense, right? Like whether it's and this is going to be a spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen the Loki TV show, but Kang the Conqueror, essentially, or a version of Kang the Conqueror, at the end of the season 1 of the Loki TV show, or any other sorts of media or any other thing like Time Lords in themselves being, you could say, principalities that go ahead and govern over these timelines and such, and being like, all right, say the timeline in which we're recording this video right now, and we're choosing to go ahead and do as we plan on doing and uploading it, however long. There's a time where that governs this one, right? And then say, oh, you know what? Maybe we go ahead and decide, all right, we're gonna go ahead and post it just as spur of the moment sort of thing. You know, that is the time lord who governs over that timeline based on change of decision. Or maybe because we go ahead and have this conversation that we're like, you know what, screw it, we shouldn't go ahead and post it. There's a time lord who governs over that one, you know what I mean? And all these sorts of things, right? Like all these different sorts of um all these different sorts of like, uh once again, principalities, different sorts of intangible forces, whether you want to say they're gods or, whatever proper label works, that you can ascribe towards, maintaining, the existential aspect of these timelines and of themselves, these different, universes within a multiverse, omniverse, and all that sort of thing, right? Kind of like the general idea of, say, you know, a you know, a thought form, right? In the most general sort of sense, right? Or, like say like, a kami, in the Shinto sort of idea of like being associated with like different like, rivers and streams and rocks and mountains and all these different like, physical locations. But there's like a conscious element to this intangible, like different flows and branches of time in of itself, right? Do you have any particular ideas in relation to that?
Well, I mean, okay. So we were actually talking about egregores, right? Before
Yes.
we've spoken about it quite frequently. But
Yes.
in terms of like each timeline having its own egregore, absolutely. Absolutely,
Yes.
because it's literally giving structure to that which has no structure. So,
Yes.
yes. And when you try to pick it apart, it gets very angry. Don't do it.
Oh yes. Yes. Oh yes. But you know, um, in regards to different time lords and all sort of thing, in terms of engaging with them for whatever sort of timeline, I guess granted, it's not necessarily something I personally have tried to do beforehand, but maybe going ahead and engaging with Time Lords himself will give you more so of an inherent understanding or maybe an ability to go ahead and, I guess, traverse them and kind of like figure out what you consciously kind of like see as a more so optimal path for yourself. It's something that you could potentially go ahead and do, right? um, and all that sort of thing. Pretty much like, hey, look, there's an aspect of existence. There probably is a consciousness associated with it, and you can probably
Mm-hmm.
go ahead and interact with it and
Absolutely.
all of that. Which I guess you could say goes ahead and brings me to kind of like at least the last part of the like pre written bullet points that I had right here was the concept of reality shifting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And taking more so of a conscious approach to go ahead and you know surf along these different waves or these different ripples or using the tree and the many different branches analogy once again, go ahead and find out the different branches and find which destination it leads to, or granted there's no ever true final destination, but go ahead and find, all right, I want to go to this certain point with these sorts of outcomes, and it kind of like consciously going ahead and navigating those, right? Um, Now, in terms of like links for people to go ahead and check out, I will go ahead and provide one where Brother Yosef himself talked about the concept of Time Lords and talked about just time in of itself, and also a article about reality shifting, as well as mentioning a book, Reality Transurfing by Vadim Zealand. I'm probably not pronouncing that name correctly, but it's Reality Transurfing Steps 1 through 4. We'll go ahead and have a link to go ahead and check that book out and all that sort of thing. But yes, the idea of reality shifting, right? There being different methodologies. I'm not going to lie, when it comes to that, I am not the most acquainted or really acquainted with it at all in terms of taking a conscious approach of, I guess you could say, seeing it from like an outside looking in perspective,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like having that manner of consciousness, but most people aren't, of course, truth be told. Um, I guess, Debbie, I would go ahead and ask you, like, have you had any sorts of experiences where you kind of saw yourself being able to shift your own reality
It
in
has never
regards to
been an
saying, like,
active process, I will say. Um,
yeah,
I have been shifted. I have been
yes,
taken from one to another, and it's very disorienting.
oh
Um,
yes,
but I have never actively done it myself. I will say, um, there is an aspect of reality shifting that I almost think kind of takes a little bit of left hand path. Um,
yeah,
and uh, becoming your own god versus serving, right? Um,
yes,
but in a sense, it's just your consciousness jumping from one body to another that is still you. It's just you in a different timeline, right?
yes,
Um, and that's uh, it's complicated. It's so complicated. I
yes,
do believe that yes, everybody does eventually shift because either your alignment is out of whack with like the timeline that you're on presently, right? And
yeah,
how you are in terms of quote vibration unquote. Um
yes,
because we are all energy, right? And so as the universe is correcting, it's putting you where you need to be, either higher vibration or lower vibration. And then from
oh yeah,
there you just kind of learn to adapt. Cause it's almost like waking up and all your furniture is like 2 inches to the left. And you're just like, this doesn't feel right. I can't put my finger on it. I don't know what's going on. And just everything feels off for a little bit until like you get that feeling just like, oh, that's what happened. Okay, cool. Awesome. I love that for
Yes.
me. Um,
Yes.
but yes. It's like I said, it's not something I've ever done consciously. It's more so done as a correction versus on purpose.
Oh, yes. Yes. I will go ahead and amend my statement previously is like, I have not necessarily consciously tried to pursue this sort of thing, at least under this particular name of reality shifting or this framework. Like I think we all go ahead and during different magical operations, different spiritual stuff, try to become better versions of ourselves or whatever sort of goal and aim you try to do. And like, of course, in that sense, right? Like, you're going ahead and affecting your reality and thus like, changing what sort of like track you're on, with the train that is you, or at least your conscious experience, right? But in terms of reality shifting in itself, I have this one article from terravara.com, and to just go ahead and like have this definition right here of what is reality shifting based on what they're typing and presenting here, in case us going ahead and talking about the subject thus far has not gone ahead and been as concise enough for everyone. So, and okay, this will be one of the things I provide as a link in the description um, with this conversation. So, what is reality shifting? Reality shifting is a term that describes the process of detaching one's awareness from their physical body and projecting it into an equivalent body in another reality. So, kind of like the idea that I was talking about with every, everywhere, everything all at once. I believe with
Hmm.
the film. Let's go ahead and check right here. Everything, everywhere, all at once. Yes, but so yes, it's somewhat similar to shamanic journeying or astral projection. The difference lies in destination. Shamanic journeying seeks to investigate the lower, middle, and upper worlds in search of information or healing, and astral projection sends a projector to the astral plane. By contrast, reality shifting sends the shifter to a physical plane that's different from the one they live in on a daily basis. Shifters describe this experience as a very intense visualization, coupled with realistic full body sensations. Reality shifters aren't limited in the realities they can explore. Following the idea that there are infinite universes and therefore all things are theoretically possible, a shifter can choose to go to a place that's identical to their favorite fictional universe. They can also visit themselves in the past, future, or a different present. In terms of being able to visit themselves in the past, that kind of like goes ahead and knocks away the previously conceived notion of there being a paradox and like you can't coexist in the same place at once with like a former version of yourself and all that. In order to get advice on altering their current reality, is reality shifting safe? For the most part, reality shifting is no more dangerous than shamanic journeying or astral projection. That doesn't mean that it's perfectly safe, however. It's very unlikely that a shifter's physical body will be in any danger. He can experience symptoms like fatigue, headaches, and dizziness from attempting to shift. Some go through a phenomenon akin to sleep paralysis. Ultimately, the biggest danger lies in the possibility of the shifter experiencing something disturbing and frightening in their chosen reality. This can be avoided with a technique called scripting. And then I will go ahead and just talk about scripting as it's written here. And I think that's where we'll leave it off in terms of reading the article with the
Hmm.
different methodology. For those who are interested, you can go ahead and check out the article yourself. But scripting. Scripting is a way of creating a concrete idea of what reality you want to inhabit and who you want to be. The script can be as long or as short as you need. Some people jot down a few key words, while others might write more elaborate scenarios. Those who wish to inhabit different bodies use their scripts to create a character, form an image of this character in their mind, and project their consciousness into this other self. Scripting also acts as a safety measure by including phrases like, I will not experience any pain or trauma. The shifter can set an intention to keep unpleasant experiences from intruding on their desired reality. So, using different sorts of, using the new age sort of terminology of like, affirmations, affirmative statements, in order to manifest, the reality that they want and all that sort of thing and all of that. But in having heard, I guess, that sort of wording and framework of, reality shifting, do you have any particular additional thoughts
I have
on
read that exact article.
that?
I have read that exact thing and I sat there, I was like, okay. So that's where I am thinking more along the lines that left hand path. Because I did
Yes,
look into shifting sometime last year, I think. I was
yes,
seeing a lot of it. Um, especially in like young high school age girls. There was a specific symbol that they were using and they were just it was uh, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was because it has been a hot minute. But they were using this specific symbol. I'll see if I can find it um to show you later. But in their shifting, they were going into like think book universes and everything, and one girl's experience, she was crying because like she went to sleep and then she spent like the last 30 years in her mind with
yes.
this character in there, and it's just like you created a little pocket universe. You didn't necessarily time travel, you didn't necessarily
Yeah.
jump timelines. You created a pocket universe between you and this character. So while yes, I understand and I recognize there is an infinite amount of universes within what we've got going on, right? There is an infinite amount of timelines. There is a difference between jumping timelines and then creating a pocket universe. Um,
Oh yeah.
so in this, uh, the scripting thing, in what life, in what timeline, in what utopian hellscape do you not experience trauma or things that are unpleasant? Um, because unpleasant teaches us lessons. Unpleasant is a growth factor for I'm just going to say about like everybody. It's
Yeah.
pretty universal, not something that's just like, oh, they can have pain and grow from pain, but I don't need pain to grow. I am that special snowflake. Um I
Oh
don't
yes.
need the pain. But
Yes.
it's just like a tree having to like a new growth tree having to harden for the winter, and if they don't, they're going to die. Um
Yes.
but that's my thoughts on the scripting. In that, like, is it valid? Absolutely. Is it actually shifting like into a different timeline? No, not so much.
Well, I'll be Mr. Devil's advocate here and kind of like
Yes, put
present
on
the
your
idea
horns.
of ha ha ha, yes. But in terms of like these sort of, all right, so you taking like a little bit more of like, all right, when you go ahead and you read on whatever sort of platform of like, you said high school age girls trying to go ahead and do that sort of thing, right? Or what have you, and you think that creating a pocket universe which is more so left hand path. I have a couple, things to say. One, I don't think it's just necessarily like a LHP sort of thing, right? Like, I think that can fall within whichever sort of, I guess, uh wavelength, or some sort of like polarity of like magical sort of things. LHP, middle path, and potentially even RHP, right hand path as well. Um, Now that said, in terms of creating pocket universes, I definitely agree that it's something that a person can do, as unintentional, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all that sort of thing, as opposed to the initial sort of like idea or concept, right? And I'm not saying that your assessment of those individuals is correct or incorrect. I don't know. I don't know them. I don't know from what they were describing. But I will say that in any sort of case, it could or couldn't have been, not my business, kind of shrug. Um, but in terms of like, say, utilizing the manner of scripting in of itself, I think it could potentially go ahead and be used as a manner of targeting to go ahead and find the actual optimal timeline for yourself,
Hmm.
or granted, creating a pocket universe as well. But I will say that, like what you mentioned, though, I will not experience any pain or trauma. The advocacy, I guess, the devil's advocate part that I'm playing with that is like, relatively speaking, right? Instead of just taking it as like a complete polar, oh, there will be no pain or trauma whatsoever, like that adjusting the scales to finding a better timeline that has less of that, right?
Hmm.
And all that sort of thing. Um, but say, for example, like, you said to what utopian hellscape or dystopia, we should say,
Yes.
and more accurate, of like you go ahead and do that. Well, I'll put it like this, right? Like over time, even if you start initially having an experience, I'm gonna go ahead and use the example of say a vacation, right? Like you can go to a place and enjoy a vacation for a particular period of time, right? Like I don't know, say you go to the Bahamas, or I don't know, you go out to rural Idaho, or wherever you happen to see is like the place you want to go, and you have what you consider a very good experience, right? Like it may be good for a small period of time. It may go ahead and be like, you know what, this place is pretty dope. It's pretty grand. It's pretty awesome. For that small period of time, and you don't really experience any pain or trauma or difficulty or anything like that, right? In the grand scheme of things, or relative to your normal everyday life. But if you spend enough time somewhere, things are gonna pop up.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
The pendulum has to swing back in terms of the sense of polarity and experiencing things within existence. You know, too much of a good thing, could potentially and very much is probable to cause bad sort of experiences, right? And
Hmm.
all that sort of thing. There's pros and cons to everything. So in that sort of sense, once again, it's optimal for targeting, but it's based on the relative viewpoint that you go ahead and have about it, and and what pain or trauma or suffering happens to be. And I guess in the point of suffering, I'll just go ahead and do the obligatory quote of the Buddhist philosophy of desire and want is the source of all suffering. To go ahead and paraphrase that, um, and all that sort of thing. So, in this sort of sense, by including phrases like "I will not experience any pain or trauma," that desire, that want, that having an expectation and trying to reach that ultimately will be the cause of some suffering down the road and all of that once something pops up that is not necessarily within your ideal. Any additional thoughts into what is that I just said?
No, I agree. Um, and I don't know. There was, if I could articulate my thoughts, that would be great. But it was more so, I think I was disturbed by how nonchalant they were being about it, or how laissez faire, because that is pretty serious. Um, but every time I was seeing it, they were also the people that came back to this one. And it's just like, okay. That's why I believe that it was more so they created a pocket universe in their own head, in their own dreamland,
Yeah.
versus an actual timeline shift. Because actual timeline shifts, like, you don't come back. Like, you don't go back to where you were. That's not how that works.
Well, I will say that generally speaking, you go ahead and you make a jump, right? Like you go from one to the other, right? However many, digit figures or decimal figures, if there's some sort of numerical, like sort of thing of tracking however many different branches or timelines or frequency bands away,
Hmm.
to use the radio analogy or whatever the case may be, they happen to go. But yeah, I would say that, once again, devil's advocate, that it is not completely impossible, probably just less probable. And two, it could be a case of like, all right, just proposing the idea of like, all right, so you have like, high school age girls you use for like, the example, going ahead and trying to attain reality shifting, right?
Hmm.
And say they do create their own pocket universe, or they actually do happen to shift to another reality, right? That say that they go ahead and they jump to another timeline or another multiverse or whatever. But then you could have a case of, like, another aspect of another, one of these like high school age girls, and all that, you know, from another timeline, with the same sort of goal, the same sort of thing, and tries to attain it, and go ahead and have whatever experience they have, right? And then they go ahead and replace the one who initially went ahead and want to perform that sort of operation. That sort of like continual fractal sort of sense, you could say, right?
Hmm.
That's not the exact same one, but one that is very relatively similar to the one that you could say jump ship from that particular timeline to
Yeah.
this particular timeline, what have you. Yeah, and that being kind of like just my manner of thinking of that sort of replacement. But um, yeah, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to cover from that article right there. And truth be told, like I think that pretty much covers like damn near everything I wanted to speak about on timelines and reality shifting and time travel in of itself. Do you think that you covered pretty much all the bases you want to, and think we did all
Yeah.
that? Any
Uh,
additional thoughts?
any additional thoughts? I have no thoughts. I'm a goldfish.
So I will take that as you're a bit spent energetically, and yes, quite a bit of a conversation on the subject. Um, so yeah, with that, once again, when it comes to the Brother Yosef video, talking about Time Lords and time travel, that will be included in the link. That article that we went ahead and just read a few paragraphs and sections from, as well as a link to the book. Let's see, Reality Transurfing by Vadim Zealand. We'll go ahead and have that as well. For more reading, more discussion on the subject. Then of course, like granted, there's like a shit ton of like TV shows and like comic book events and films and all anime and all that sort of thing that you can just delve into if you want an entertainment sort of thing as opposed to like more so educational. But there we have it, folks. Timelines, reality shifting, and time travel. So, as usual, I very much appreciate having Devi here to go ahead and discuss this with her. And yeah, anything you want to say to the folks who are listening?
Just have a great freaking night.
Oh, all right then. So yeah, that's Twisted with the Open Sorcery, and stay frosty, Neguses. Peace.